because lots of people coming through. So I'm trying to stop it so that it doesn't disturb our meeting. But so welcome to this informal consultative meeting of members of the Transport Committee. It's informal because legally we have to have decision-making meetings in person. There is no legislation for us to have those online. But obviously, given the current rates of infection across the country, it is deemed sensible to have this as an informal consultative meeting, as many of the items on this agenda are for noting. And as we just discussed there, the minutes of this meeting can therefore be approved more formally at a future meeting. And we hope the next meeting will be able to be in person rather than online, but we shall wait and see. That's not all in our gift, I'm afraid. So starting with the agenda then properly, apologies for absence. Are there any apologies for absence?
We've received apologies from Professor Pringle, Councillor de Gorn and Councillor Morley, Chair.
Lovely, thank you very much. And declarations of disclosable pecuniary interest. Is there anybody who wants to make a disclosure?
Well, I'm just looking for my hand, Susan. I can't find where to put a hand up.
I can hear your voice though, Martin. So what?
Just for declaration, I've had a few emails about a scheme in Shipley and Bingley from residents that have asked me that if there's anything on the agenda to raise it. I don't know if other colleagues have had the similar email, but just to note that I have been lobbied by Bradford residents.
Right, and we get lobbied across all sorts of things all the time, Martin. So you don't need to declare something like that for future reference. But anyway, exempt information, possible exclusion of the press and public. As far as I'm aware, there is no exempt information on this agenda.
No, Chair.
And then going to the minutes of the meeting of the Transport Committee held on the 5th of November 2021. Has anybody obviously we've got to note these as we referred to earlier in the conversation, rather than passing them at this meeting. But are there any sort of comments or amendments that need to be made to those, or are our people going to advise that those are a correct record of that meeting? No. Well, in that case, we'll take those as a correct record of that meeting, notwithstanding the fact that we'll have to approve them formally at the next meeting. And then the first, therefore, substantive item on the agenda is transport network update. And this is obviously an update which was done really in the run up to Christmas, so isn't quite as up to date in the paper. And obviously, Dave would be appreciative if you could give us a bit more information. In fact, I think you've put something in the chat, haven't you? There is this,
I have, yes, but I'll talk.
Is this more up to date? Is it? Or yes, could you just give us a bit of an update from the paper, really? Thank you.
I can do. Thank you, Chair.
And can everybody go on mute as well, please, if you're not speaking? Thank you.
And yes, good morning and happy New Year to everyone. Yeah, as Councillor Hinchcliffe says, we finalised this paper in the week before Christmas, and obviously the impact of the pandemic on everything has continued to affect everything, including public transport. So what I thought I'd do is I've posted a more detailed sort of update for you in the chat, just to give you a little bit more information if you need it. But just to summarise it, I mean, I think the main effect is that before the working from home and Plan B advice came in, then bus services had built slowly in terms of their patronage across the autumn period. I think that slowed things down a little, with a little bit less commuting, and it had an impact on demand. I think that the biggest thing that's impacting on lots of sectors at the moment, including the public transport sector, is the staff availability issues around people both testing positive and isolating, and people being ill, and that is having an effect on the public transport provision at the same time. The driver shortages, which we have talked about in this committee quite a lot, whilst I think the the labour market issues are still very much present in the bus industry. In particular, they're probably not any worse than they were when we reported to you last time, but they're still present. So that's adding to a general sort of staff availability issue. Bus operators have scaled some of their timetables back to reflect that, so that they can, what they do run, they can run more robustly, but the service is still prone to short notice cancellations or delays. And we're sort of trying to work through that with the bus operators to try and minimise the impact, and some timetables are changing accordingly. On the rail side, I think the impact of the Plan B COVID arrangements probably has a more effect in terms of reducing some rail travel, both in terms of commuting and leisure journeys. The rail operators likewise are having issues around staff availability, and that's impacting on cancellations. And as of this week, the both Northern and Transpennine Express are operating to reduce timetables to again provide a resilient service with fewer people. So generally, it's a difficult picture, and I think we're finding this across all sectors as well in terms of staff availability. I think there's a paper in the agenda which I'll come to later, which identifies some of the funding issues which we've got as well, that are impacting on this and resulting in the risk of more fundamental and long-term impacts on the bus network. But I'll talk to that when we get to that particular point in the agenda. But generally, this report with the appendices to it is your update on the transport network. So I'll stop talking there and happy to answer questions on any aspect of the report.
Thank you, Dave. And I suppose alongside this is the health of the district and of the region, isn't it, really? In that London has been very badly hit with COVID, and it's gradually making its way up to us as well. And I think our peak is probably going to be end of January from what I'm hearing. And therefore, this is likely to be prolonged up until the end of January, possibly. I mean, how quickly can services be stepped back up from where they are now? Are they going to review it on a weekly basis, or? Yeah,
I think that's we do have a very frequent sort of communication with bus operators, so we can review it on a week by week basis to reflect the fact that if the current Omicron wave sort of passes through, for want of a better expression, and the working from home advice is lifted, then clearly we want a public transport network that gets people back out and about and back into their workplaces, and really we need to be anticipating that as the next sort of positive step forward in this particular process. But we do so with having flagged the fact that there are longer term impacts on workforce as well in the industry, as they are in other sectors as well. So we do need to anticipate getting things back is really important.
Thank you, Dave. Now I've got Councillor Buckley and Councillor Keith wanting to speak. So Councillor Buckley.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And I just wanted to follow on with those remarks that Dave just made. It's not a good situation when the passenger numbers need to go upwards and they're actually going downwards. And I think we need to be careful that we get our language right here, because as my understanding of this is that people use the word, we haven't actually this morning, but people do use the word cases. And actually at the moment, it's simply a great huge mass of positive results. So people are testing positive, either with very mild symptoms or with no symptoms whatsoever. And I just wondered whether we knew, because Councillor Hinchcliffe mentioned it coming up from London, well, sort of, but we know that London is a big problem because a lot of people are not vaccinated. And I just wondered whether the operators know how many of their drivers have been vaccinated, whether we know that detail, and presumably whether we know whether it's simply a positive test or whether they're actually not feeling very well. But in any event, my point is that it's a desperate need, as we all agree, to get passenger numbers up. So what lobbying can we do to say to government, we need to move beyond this stage, and we need to start to think about services and the economy and getting on. And the fact that we have zillions of positive tests with hardly anybody sick, that should tell its own story. That's it, Chairman.
Thank you. Well, obviously, anecdotally, I think we all know people who are quite ill at the moment. So it's not to be underestimated how seriously ill people can get, and obviously the pressures on our NHS are absolutely real, and we have to be able to support the NHS to cope with that rising demand. So this is not a fad, Councillor Buckley. I'm sure you'll realise that. David, did you want to just respond to Councillor Buckley's wider point there?
Yes, I mean, I think in terms of the question is, do they know they're vaccinated? I think as all employers, including the Government Authority and councils as well, I mean, that's not information that employers are privy to in the current arrangements, and in some respects, what we're all working to is the rules, and the rules in terms of and they do change in terms of positive lateral flow tests, isolation, and obviously it's gone down to 7 days now. So I think that this flux is there because of there's a process that employers expect and require their staff to go through, and I think bus operators and rail operators are in the same boat as all the other employers in that sense. I think Councillor Buckley makes is a really good point, because the longer term thing is we do need to recover public transport patronage. I think one of the concerns is that the confidence in public transport has been dented a little bit by concerns around that come from the advice around sort of congested spaces and things like that. But I think what we have been doing through our sort of representations at officer level, official level, to Department of Transport, and I know these have been made at political level as well, is that we absolutely do need to, when the time is right, to encourage people onto public transport. And we've been doing some work all the way through this about giving people reassurance around things like cleaning, around things like the management of public transport, to give people and restore people's confidence. But I think to a certain extent it is a confidence building exercise that we will have to do when the time is right to do that. But at the moment, whilst the advice is work from home if you can, it's not particularly good time to be encouraging people to make journeys that are slightly contrary to what the government advice is. Thank you, Dave. Councillor Keith?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and a happy New Year to everybody here, and a safe and healthy one. Yeah, I mean, we talked in terms of the bus routes and the expectation levels that people have. We have the most profitable Arriva franchise in Wakefield, operating on the 110 bus route from Wakefield to Leeds. And 2 weeks before Christmas, I did a surgery, and with the little app on phones, people were saying how many buses were on that route, and blazing down the side, they say they're every 10 minutes. There were 4 buses on that route, so you can't be every 10 minutes. And there were some people stood at a bus stop waiting for the 8:30 bus, still at 9:30. So I think what we've got to say here with this pandemic is that we're not out of the neck of the woods. We're not sure of it yet. I'm sitting on an overview and scrutiny committee for health and adult health, and yesterday we got a notice from Pinderfields Hospital here in Wakefield that they're going to operation level 4, which is 1 down from a critical incident. And so it goes to show that whether we've got lots and lots of people testing positive, the impact is on the healthcare system. And what we get in here is this thing is seasonal. And I think that what we've got is here, choose what rules we make and say that we've got a rule of so many people to meet. It's a de facto lockdown. And basically people can't turn up for work, so you can't provide the services, so that therefore people, and in fact, we're having a lockdown. And I think that what we've got to come to terms with over the period of time is that at this time of year, we might have to consider having a circuit break after Christmas. We might have to consider expectation levels dropping for services, but then go back to putting his efforts into getting people back on public transport when they want to be on them. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Keith. I'm certainly hopeful that this kind of stop-start won't last forever, and that we'll get some, back to normal, if you like, at some point in the future. So I am hopeful of that in the future. Councillor Groves.
Thank you, Chair. I think there's two things that when we first started on this journey, and it'll be 2 years in March, and we were talking about a 2-year recovery. I think we're talking about a 3 or 4 year recovery now in terms of economics. And sadly, in terms of COVID-19, the patronage levels have fallen, and rightly so, because we needed to protect people. So we had to make some difficult choices, and people have had to stay at home. I think our problem is that in West Yorkshire, the figures were still at 84%, and we're building. We had some of the best bus patronage figures in the country, and that's because our people have no choice. They have no other mode of transport. So I think our challenge is that we need to retain the network that we've got. I hear what Councillor Keith is saying, but obviously circumstances of drivers being absent is something that's out of our control, and payment is something that needs looking at, and shifts is something that needs looking at. But I think our number one challenge is to maintain the network. Our number two challenge is that network's got to grow, because we've got to get the model shift out of car. We've got to look at what the new customer market looks like, because I think if anyone is convinced that people are going to return to offices 5 days a week, I'm not quite sure that will happen. So we're going to have to look at new markets. We're going to have to look at leisure. We're going to have to look at nighttime economy. We're going to have to look at weekend travel. So I think there's a big piece of work to do. But like I say, we just have to maintain the network that we've got. Because if that should disappear, then that means people will lose their jobs. There's no doubt about it.
And become more isolated from society in general, isn't it, early as well, Councillor Groves? Which Absolutely. Is not good for us. We're social beings and need to be together at some point. So absolutely. So any further questions of Dave on that paper? I'm not seeing anybody else indicating. So we'll move on now then. Let me see, was I meant to do something on that paper? Let me just check.
Sorry, Councillor Hinchcliffe.
Yes.
Sorry, just Councillor Buckley was waving. I don't think you saw him.
Sorry, I thought you'd spoken, Councillor Buckley.
Well, I have, but I wanted to bring up. We're still on item 5, aren't we?
Yes, yes, we can be. Yes, yes, we are.
Yeah. Okay. It was a brief question actually to do with page 33, and on the tables there, and it mentions an interesting table at the bottom about park and ride services, and these are the overall figures, the overall totals. And I just wonder whether it would be helpful if in future we could break it down into individual park and rides, so that would be a little bit more meaningful and we could compare one against the other.
I'm not sure, how many have we got in West Yorkshire, Dave?
There's 3 in Leeds. There's the Zelland Road, there's Temple Green, and there's Sturton. We do have the data on each individually, so we can provide that level of detail. Clearly, it's perhaps of relevance to Leeds members more than others. But yeah, I mean we do we have quite extensive sort of monitoring of passenger use on that. So I can help Councillor Buckley or any other members in the detail there. It's all available.
Thanks. So, Councillor Buckley, it's a Leeds specific issue. Councillor Groves, you are a Leeds councillor. You may know a bit more detail on that.
Well, it is, and we can definitely get the figures. However, what I would say is a conversation that I had yesterday is if services are drawn away from our core networks right across West Yorkshire that First run, then First may have to look at not running all those services in the park and ride, because they're still running buses every 10 minutes, but then taking buses out of the wider network. So I think we should hold back on when we look at those figures, Councillor Buckley, because I do feel that the operators need to be agile. And if there's no customers at the park and ride throughout the day, then they should just be running at peak and actually supporting the wider network so people can get to work.
So we're not operating a business as usual at the moment, are we? I think everybody accepts that, and therefore any figures we look at the moment are inevitably impacted by the current health.
I mean, Councillor Groves makes a good point about targeting the buses where we need them, and I think that's a fair point, because to a certain extent park and ride is a level of peak. I think that the information we offer in this report on park and ride is in some ways it's also a bit of a proxy on Leeds city centre commuting patterns as well, so it's offered in that sort of vein as well to a bit, but as you can see, and it's significantly less than it used to be. So we sort of do need to monitor it, and as Councillor Grove says, we may need to ensure that we put the resource where it's needed in terms of the buses and drivers.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Have I missed anybody else who may have been waving but not putting their artificial hand up? No, I think then we're done on that item. So we note the information in the report, which is quite comprehensive. And Dave, obviously, there's a moving feast, literally. So let's see where we are at the next meeting. But yes, we want bus patronage up, but the absolute prerequisite that customers want to see is that they will be safe going out and about, isn't it? And regardless of what any of us think, it's a decision of the customer whether they use public transport or not. So moving on now to the next item on the agenda, which is bus policy update, something that we've discussed frequently at this committee meeting in the past. We are still waiting on BSIP, is my understanding. Dave, do you want to take this away?
Yes, I mean, this really is bringing the committee up to date with a number of things which we've talked about in previous meetings and have been discussed at the Combined Authority meetings as well. If you recall, back in June of last year, the Combined Authority made two key decisions. One, to start the work in terms of assessing the business cases were for franchising, but also to start embarking on on developing an enhanced partnership. And the enhanced partnership formal notices were issued in December following approval at the Combined Authority in early December. So we're in a formal process with the enhanced partnership, and at the next meeting we'll bring the outcome of that back, and we're in a formal consultation engagement process at the moment. But everything is geared towards having an enhanced partnership in place by the end of March, which is one of the requirements of the National Bus Strategy and the government's requirements. As Councillor Hinchliffe says, we submitted our bus service improvement plan, which we talked about at this committee in previous meetings at the end of October, and are still waiting to understand the outcome of that. And in the meantime, we're looking at various different options depending on what the funding outcome is, and clearly when we know that, then we will be reporting back in terms of what's the best way of deploying the funding we get from government and the bus service improvement plan alongside local funding and our capital programs to deliver on that bus service improvement plan. So we're in a bit of a holding a waiting position with all of this at the moment. We're progressing the franchising assessment, and the Finance, Resources and Corporate Committee yesterday approved the initial funding to be able to progress that. And we put a bid into the government's zero emission bus scheme at the end of the month, which is our sort of detailed bid for just over £22 million worth of funding to convert to facilitate the procurement of electric buses into the region. So happy to take questions on any of that.
Thanks. I mean, it's disappointing to see in the paper in 2.9 that it's anticipated, the combined authorities BSIP funding allocation will be significantly short of the 168 million. I mean, we were very, looking forward to delivering ambitious, better quality and more frequent services for people across West Yorkshire. But it sounds to me like government is now backpedaling on that. Is that what you're feeling at national level?
Well, I mean, firstly, this process started with the government setting aside £3 billion for buses. That figure has already reduced because they've already taken nearly half of that for what they term as emergency funding for buses, and we'll talk about that in the next paper a little. The challenge which we were set and the way in which as a region we wanted to approach this was to say, well, actually, what would it cost to run the bus service that we need? And I think one of the good things around doing the bus service improvement plan was that we actually put some figures around that and some definition around what the bus service the region needs, accepting the fact that the price tag for that was 168 million pounds of revenue. So to a certain extent, we are concerned, and I'm sure our members are concerned, that the available money for the bus service improvement plan has already shrunk, and it's not going to meet our expectations. I think the challenge that we will therefore have is how do we make the best use of what we do have and we do get to be able to make a positive start on delivering on that bus service improvement plan. But it will be less than what we bid for.
That's deeply disappointing. Councillor Scullion, did you want to come in? So you're indicating.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse my voice. I'm suffering from a very bad cold and fortunately not COVID. I just wanted wrapped up in this report is the Zebra bid of 22.4 million and some caution around that. I wanted to ask how likely it was that we are actually going to get all of that 22.4 million. And I'll say again, because I'll keep on saying it, in terms of both Calderdale and Kirklees, we are concerned about, excuse me, a trickle down effect in terms of buses being replaced in Bradford and Leeds in particular, and the diesel buses, the older stock coming to us really. And we want to make sure that actually our interests are represented, and we really welcome the Zebra money to do that. But I am concerned that the government may not actually find the 22.4 million.
Given our previous conversation, yes, I think we would share your concern. David, do you have any insight into that?
Yeah, I think that a little bit more optimistic in that sense, because as the report says, we have we've pre-qualified to the next stage of this. So to a certain extent, the shape of our bid and the value of our bid sort of fits with what government set aside for this. So to a certain extent, I think that there's a little bit more optimism there. But see, these are changing times in terms of government funding and finances, as we know. So but I think there's a little bit of optimism there. I think the other thing to say in Councillor Scullion makes some strong points around, we've talked in this committee before around the sort of consequences of as it were, a trickle down of vehicles and moving vehicles around to address clean air zones and things like that. I think the zebra bid is only really very, very much the start of the process of converting our bus fleet into zero carbon. At best, it gets us to 10% of that on that journey. It is predicated by where operators are willing to invest in depot infrastructure and put match funding into it. We have identified that we will deploy some of this money onto the bus services run under contract with the combined authority, and in particular, we will use that to ensure that the Calderdale and Kirklees areas are covered, because we've identified at previous meetings that the environmental performance of buses in those areas is the poorest in the region. So we've got a little bit of a plan which we will bring back to this committee in terms of how to do that when we find out the outcome of this bid and the next stages.
So that's a little bit more positive there, Councillor Scullion. Councillor Buckley.
Thank you, Chair. And following actually on from that very point, really, at the very top of page 39, where the papers mentioned the zero emission bus fleet and the increase to 10%. And I think Dave is aware, because I think he was at the scrutiny board where I actually asked the managing director of First Bus about this, because when we went back to the original deal on this, and it was a kind of gentleman's agreement really between the former council of Blake and First Bus, that Leeds would do all the infrastructure, which has been done and is being done, and in return First Bus would deliver 284 of these low emission or zero emission, not zero emission, but low emission buses. Now, actually, they've only delivered about 170, 180, something like that. And I asked first why this was, and he said, well, we've no money. Now, I fully understand why he's got no money, but that's not the point. It's not happened. So that's my first question as to when this will actually happen. And then secondly, if I may, Chair, just a brief question on a slightly more parochial level. At the bottom of page 37, mention is made of bus lane design and operation and the provision of bus shelters. And in my ward, there is a suburban bus stop with a shelter right on a junction, which is actually dangerous. And outside a huge area of a huge pavement and parking area. And I had a meeting with officers from Wyker and Leeds Highways, who both agreed it was dangerous and should be addressed, and the whole thing should be moved inwards off the carriageway. And then both of them wrote back to me and said, yeah, it's dangerous, but there's no money. So it's staying as it is. So they're my two questions. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, I'm not sure we can. There is obviously, for this committee, it looks at policy and strategy across the region. And obviously, there is a policy around bus stops and when shelters are used and when they're not used, and that is something perhaps we can take offline, Councillor Buckley, if you think there needs to be an amendment to that policy. So if you want to write to me offline and say where you think the policy should be amended, perhaps that's something we can discuss at a later date. But regarding the first issue, Dave, do you want to just come back on that?
Yeah, I was at the same sort of Leeds City Council scrutiny meeting that Councillor Buckley refers to. I mean, and he's absolutely correct that the commitment that First made to deliver the Euro 6 buses into Leeds has stalled, partly initially because there was an issue with the supplier, and then more recently because the financial uncertainties around the current COVID situation. That said, I think we did get there's still a commitment from the company to actually deliver on those vehicles. It's just happening a lot slower. And we did go into the the Leeds Public Transport Improvement Programme, with part of the arrangement with government was that the match funding would include the bus operators' contribution through the new buses. So I think we will continue to press first to deliver on that commitment, albeit understanding that lots of other things have happened in the meantime, not least issues in the bus supply industry that's slowed down the delivery of those buses. But it's still a commitment. We will still seek to ensure first honour that commitment.
That's a good point. I mean, some vehicles are taking up to a year to deliver, aren't they now? I understand that's not just because buses, it's vans as well, I understand. But
yes,
I've got
lots of issues in there.
You can just agree with me, Dave, on that one. Thank you. I've got Councillor Salam. I think Councillor Garbutt, you put Q in the chat. Is that a question you've got as well? Okay, well, I'll come to you after Councillor Salam and Councillor Groves, if that's all right. Thank you. Councillor Salam.
Thanks, Chair. I think Dave touched upon the fact of passenger numbers and personnel needed to actually deliver the services in West Yorkshire. I think we do worry about the number of partners growth, but Bradford has been on top of the tree for passenger growth in the whole of West Yorkshire, especially in the first group, which is very encouraging. However, I don't see anything about the shortage of drivers. Now, it's very difficult at this moment of time to actually encourage people to come into the industry and also to actually, keep the drivers that we've got at this moment of time, because a lot of people are looking at other industries, especially the HGV industry. Because in 2.3, it does say that to ensure buses deliver a service that meets the needs of West Yorkshire residents and businesses. But if we haven't got the personnel to actually deliver the service, then, we could have the best buses. And under Zebra, we could get actually all street lights or above the Euro 6, emissions engines. But those buses will be stored because there will be nobody to actually drive them. So I think we need to make sure that we concentrate on that side of it also, to see how the operators are actually encouraging people to come into the industry. Because I've said it in the last committee meeting, unless we make the industry attractable to new entrants, and also to make sure that the current employees that we've got, unless they feel that they've been valued and they've been actually, that it's attracted to them, people are just going to leave, especially people who are coming up to this age of 60 or even 55, where they can get their pensions released. That's the biggest worry that we've also got, that, we've got experienced people in the industry who are seriously thinking about leaving the industry because they don't feel comfortable anymore, and or they don't feel they have been valued anymore. So we could have the best policies in place, but unless we've got people to actually deliver that service, it's just not going to happen. I know the enhanced partnership, and when we talk about enhanced partnership, I think we were actually, bullied into that by the government. Unless we did it by June last year, we were not going to be able to get any further funding that we were going to, that was available to us. So that was something that we were also, bullied into by the government. So, but I'm not criticizing the enhanced partnership. That's something that should be there, but we should also look at the franchising part of it. But at the same time, all components have to be assessed, equally. It's not just the passenger numbers. It's not about zero emission buses. It's also about the people who are going to be delivered that service. I think that's also important it should be important to us. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor Salam. Excellent point, of course. We already referred to that earlier in the agenda as well, didn't we? I'll go to Councillor Groves first, actually, because from an enhanced partnership point of view, is that a mechanism, notwithstanding the manner in which we had to adopt it, but is that a mechanism where we might address that issue?
It could be. I don't know if we would fully be able to address all of the issues that Tat just raised, if I'm honest. We've got to really put down a set of priorities in the enhanced partnership at what we want to get out, and that's what we're working on at this moment in time. I don't know if Dave wants to add anything further legally, if we can.
I think Councillor Grove said in one level, the enhanced partnership is a useful way of engaging and working collaboratively with bus operators, and the issues that Councillor Salam sort of identifies, to a certain extent, there are issues for them as employers in terms of the terms and conditions of their employment and how they can make that employment more attractive and all of that. So the enhanced partnership itself doesn't really get involved in the relationship between bus companies and their staff. But that said, I think there are, and we've seen it through the pandemic as well, where we have had much more closer engagement and drawing the bus companies together, because they were quite separate. It has got to have some benefit in terms of being able to look at the problem across the piece and see what can be done. And we have sort of engage a little bit more widely with both the bus industry through to the things we've done with the Alliance and some of our colleagues in economic services as well, to explore what support can be given to the industry in the wider sense to deal with its recruitment and retention issues. So I don't think the enhanced partnership, I think what we're saying is the enhanced partnership in and of itself is probably not the solution to the labour problems in the bus industry, and but it can offer a mechanism where we can at least address the issues and signpost to these solutions.
Thank you. I mean, it's an issue which is not just in the interest of the drivers, the public, but also the companies themselves, I would have thought. So I'm sure that regardless of the partnership or the forum which we speak, it is something we should all be looking at and addressing as a matter of priority. And I know the Mayor has also spoken about it. So it is something that we need to make sure we create space for resolving in this industry, because it does impact directly on services. Councillor Groves, did you have something else to add either on that? Or?
I just wanted to clarify Councillor Scullion's point, because she's absolutely right that Kirklees and Calderdale have got less clean fleets. Just to clarify that when we put in the zebra bid, we did increase the 4 million for Calderdale and for Kirklees for that very reason. Yes, just to confirm from Dave and Helen that will then be for new buses. And my second point I wanted to make I've got three. Second point I wanted to make is that even if we've got electric buses, and what Dave is saying, it depends on the depot, it depends on the operators. There's nothing to stop us. And no, we have got some work going on at Wyker, because I've been involved in it, at looking at land use for hydrogen plants. Liverpool are doing some exciting work, and the Mayor's going to hold a round table, because there's economies of scale between each mayoral authority around purchasing hydrogen. But I think we need to move the agenda on and just not wait for operators as well. So I just wanted to add that the grid won't take everything. If we're all depending on the grid, that's just not going to happen. And then just on Councillor Buckley's point, I do believe, and we may have to go back to first, that it was said that they didn't have any money, but then they've sold their North America arm. The transatlantic deal went through. They settled the historic debt. They've paid up the pension deficit. And I believe now that they are in a position to purchase those new buses because of those things that have happened, but we need to get clarification on that. Certainly not heard that they're not purchasing new buses.
Okay, thank you for those points of clarification there, Kim. Dave, did you want to come back on any of that before I go to Councillor Garbutt?
I think Councillor Gross sort of identified, we have, and I think the report says as well, in the zebra bid, we've got money set aside to actually procure directly some services, some buses for bus services that run under contract with the Combined Authority, and we are looking at Kirklees and Calderdale as the areas where we do that.
Thank you. Councillor Garbutt.
Yes, thank you, Chair. It's partly been answered now, but the question was on timescales on these bids. When do you get to know, or is it timescales, or is it just a case of wait and see?
For BSIP
Yeah, well, all the funding.
and Zebra. Yeah. So have we any indication, Dave, about when white smoke might come out of government and let us know? Oh, Helen's putting a hand up, actually. Helen, did you want to come?
Helen might be closer to it.
Helen?
Okay, thank you, Chair. So we are still waiting on BSIP. We had heard informally that it might be January. We are in January, so we'll see what happens. And so we are still just waiting on that. On Zebra, it will be March. We are due to submit the business case at the end of January, and so we're not expecting to hear until March.
Okay, but we're more positive about that, hopefully, at the moment. And you've heard today how important it is that all parts of the region do benefit from hopefully the winning bid that comes through on Zebra, because obviously we need to improve air quality everywhere, not just in parts of West Yorkshire. We are very closely linked and interconnected, so it is important for us. Councillor Firth, do you want to come in finally?
Thank you very much, Chair. And thank you, Kim, for highlighting this once again. We are really badly served, and I know I'm repeating the fact that Calderdale and Kirklees, 43%, only 43% of our buses are clean, and actually it's a scandal. And First Bus and Arriva obviously are responsible. I mentioned it before. We're getting all the older buses. It has been mentioned earlier in this meeting, and I know I'm repeating myself, but a lot of our buses went to Leicester. I think I've said that before too, and it has to be addressed. And I'm fed up with the bus companies saying they've nothing. They clearly have some money now, so let's hope they actually put the hand in the pocket and buy these new buses as they were promised. Thank you, Chair.
Indeed, thank you, Councillor Firth. Because it's pollution, people don't see the damage it does it? Because it's in the air and you can't necessarily see it. But it is absolutely essential that all our fleets, all across the region, get clean, modern vehicles, so that we all lead healthier lives as a result. Any more questions or comments on that paper? Obviously, there's quite a few things outstanding on there. We'll just have to wait and see on those bids. As Councillor Garbutt highlighted, we need to know the answer to those as soon as possible. But we have everything crossed. And as usual, members of committee, if you have any opportunities to lobby government ministers, do so on our behalf. And I'm sure myself, Councillor Groves, Councillor Kaushik, and officers indeed will be able to supply you with the information you need to do that lobbying. So that is noted. Going on then for the next item on the agenda, which is item 7, bus service funding. Is this you again, Dave? I think
it is, yes. And there's a couple of things in this paper I'll just bring members' attention to, and just really, we often actually this time of year in Transport Committee have a discussion around the forthcoming year's budget ahead of the Combined Authority setting its budget, and I think this year is quite exceptional in terms of there's quite a few live issues that we're having to deal with. I think firstly, the buses since the pandemic started have been supported by a combination of government grant and local funding to make up the difference between the lost revenue that they're not getting through the fare box. That arrangement, which has changed a little bit as the pandemic's moved through, that arrangement comes to an end at the end of March. And so we are looking at the sort of what's euphemistically called a cliff edge in terms of funding into buses, and that gives quite a lot of concern, because the bus companies are flagging the fact that when we wrote this paper and when we were talking about this back in the autumn, the optimistic view was that bus patronage was going to return to around about 80% of previous levels by the end of March. That's that is even more optimistic now that we've had another wave of the pandemic. So whilst government hasn't said it won't continue that funding, beyond the end of March. We have no certainty around that, and the bus companies have no certainty, and neither as transport authorities or the bus operators themselves can do any meaningful financial planning for the coming year under this arrangement. The Mayor has written to the Minister responsible for buses, Baroness Veer, as you see in the pack, to say, well, look, this is a very unsatisfactory arrangement, but we still haven't got any feedback from that. And I think, as Helen mentioned, with the bus service improvement plan, we're told announcements will be made in January at some point, but we're still not sure. So we've got this uncertainty. The budget that the Transport Committee, the Combined Authority, sorry, will consider early in February, I think seeks to, the best we can do really is to ensure that the transport levy and the funding set aside for buses is available to be able to support as best we can the bus network and not to precipitate any further damage. But I think there is a risk as we stand at the moment with bus operators making some fairly structural changes to their network and reductions to their network. And we're already in discussions with bus operators and one particular bus operator around some plans that they've got, which we've briefed some local members on. They haven't firmed up those plans, but I think there is a real risk now that the bus network shrinks just at the time when we're embarking upon a bus service improvement plan to improve it. So this report basically sets out that situation. It also covers bus fares. Under the current arrangements for bus funding, government enable bus operators to increase fares within the consumer price index levels. First, West Yorkshire did some fairly extensive fare changes in December. Some fares actually went down, some fares went up, and they changed the structure of their fares rather. They did demonstrate an analysis of what they were doing to be within CPI, so it was compliant with the government's conditions, and we're aware of Arriva Yorkshire. We're also looking at their fares, and we will push them hard to make sure that they do keep within the consumer price index, because clearly there is a cost of living issue with increasing costs across the board as well, and increasing travel costs for people who have no options is very much a concern. So this report's basically summarising where we are financially, what the context for the Combined Authority setting its budget next month will be, and I'm happy to take any questions around that. But it's just really here for your information.
Thank you, Dave. It is certainly concerning as this paper, isn't it? I think just to make the point, which I try and make on a regular basis, is that the local funding for buses is actually council taxpayers. So the council tax that people pay, to 8% of our revenue in Bradford goes to the Combined Authority to subsidise bus fares and bus routes. And I think people need to know that this is council tax money that is going on buses. And of course, as you noted in the paper, we're not reducing that, but yet there is a lot of pressures on the finances around buses, notwithstanding government really having no plans in the future for how that's going to be subsidised. And that is a real concern, actually. We've got prices increasing across the country for all sorts of services. And it sounds like, buses also forecast to go up, which for the cost of living is really, really serious. And I would urge government to continue that subsidy at a similar level to enable people to get about and get to work. Sorry, Councillor Keith, you were wanting to come in there.
Yeah, Chair. I mean, what we've got to look at here is the oncoming year, and when we're setting budgets, is the impact of the inflation rate, the impact of new taxes that's coming on people, the impact of, as I say, actually feeding yourself, eating your home, various different things is going to go through the roof. So we've got to be careful to pitch this rise at the exact right amount so that people can afford to go back to public transport, can even if it's for leisure. If we're going to increase the fares, I totally agree that we should be increasing the fares in line with sort of like the cost of living and various different things. But we are in a perfect storm here. We must remember that we're providing a product here, and we can't overprice it because people will just find alternatives or cheaper alternatives.
Thank you, Councillor Keith. And sadly, we don't have any control over the fares. It sounds like it's the bus companies who decide that rather than us. I would just urge them to work with government to make sure those increases don't happen, to be quite honest. Councillor Gross, Councillor Firth, I'm sort of ignoring your hand because I think it's a legacy hand. Do let me know if that's otherwise. Councillor Groves.
Yeah, I think it's a worrying situation, but in terms of increases, it's something that we haven't supported. We have said we can't support increases to bus fares politically, but even before the increases, people found that the fares were too high anyway. And actually, you know, for what they're earning, and we know that, you know, there's going to be a hike of it, increases in maybe energy costs and food. So it's going to get even harder for these people. The government really needs to step in because this is a broken model. They have subsidised the London for years on the buses. And now they're telling us that model doesn't work. That actually they're going to have to withdraw 100 routes. They're going to have to hike up fares down there. So there's got to be, if they want to get the country moving, if they want to help people, they're going to have to give more money for transport to lower fares. If they want to attract a model shift, it's going to have to be a lower, flatter fare. It's going to have to be heavily subsidised right across the country, because transport is a solution to so many policy objectives, but the government are just going to have to start to take this seriously.
Absolutely agree with Councillor Groves. We need to start viewing public transport as a public good, a public service. It's not something, and as I'm sure the bus companies would agree at the moment, it's not something you make an awful lot of money out of. It is about providing a service so that people can get around, do their jobs, see their family, get to public services like hospitals, etc. That's not a choice, that's a necessity, and therefore we need to treat it as such. Does anybody have any other comments on this? Obviously, it is a work in progress, but I think, you know, we do urge government to get back to our mayor's plea really for a response on this issue, and a positive response to make sure that bus companies can continue to provide the full service, which we all know we'd like to improve on and expand further, but just providing the service at the moment seems to be a challenge for the bus companies, and that does rely on continued subsidy of that transport system. We're doing our bit, council taxpayers are doing their bit in the region. We need government to play their part and provide a subsidy so that these prices don't go up. Has anybody got any further questions or comments they want to make on this item? I can't see anybody virtually or in the chat. Or Councillor Groves, you've got your hand up. But
just because I feel so strongly about this. You know, people on low paid incomes, and especially young people in first level jobs, if you actually do the sums, they only earn 11 months pay, because the other month is spent on transport, practically. So we've got to try and get this resolved for them.
Indeed. So we've obviously given due consideration. Just looking at the letter there, the mayor has written a letter, and I think, you know, perhaps obviously happy. I think as a committee would be happy, obviously, to add our support as always to the mayor in her proactive lobbying of government there. And I think perhaps if we can just provide a further update and any opportunities to lobby government, if it's a letter from me as Transport Committee Chair, but I think I'd say the Mayor's already written there, but if we can do any more, we want to do something on this issue because it is so important to that everyday running of transport and keeping West Yorkshire moving. So I think that message, obviously, hopefully, has been heard loud and clear, Dave.
Yes, it has, and obviously we wait the next announcements and then the response and reaction to them. Thank
you, Councillor Salam. Did you want to come in finally there?
Just very quickly, Chair. I think one of the things that we've got to actually congratulate, whether it's the operators or West Yorkshire Combined Authority, is that the new fare structures that have actually been brought in, where boundaries have actually been abolished. So you could actually now buy a ticket and go throughout the whole of West Yorkshire, which is encouraging for a lot of people, because otherwise they would have had to buy a much dearer ticket. Also, some of the evening fares that are actually being introduced and the single fares that are actually being introduced, the top on, top off. I mean, it's still in its early stages, and not a lot of people have actually sort of started using it, unfortunately, because they don't understand it fully. Whereas in London, it's different. It's been there for a very long time. But I think one of the facts that we've got to remember is that if we want a really good transport service and a network, there's got to be investment, initially in the early stages. Because if you can show people affordable, reliable transport network, I'm 100% sure that people will start using our network. We've seen it in other parts of Europe, in other parts of the world, where initial funding has been allocated to and infrastructure has been laid down, and you see buses and trains full of passengers every single day. I think that's the model that we also need to look at. The government can actually, make promises, but unless there is definite investment, nothing's going to change. And that's the worry for those of us who are actually in the transport sector. That's the worry for us going forward.
Thank you, Councillor Salam. And I think, obviously I agree with those words, and do have concerns for the future with a model that doesn't work. It does need reform. And we all need to work together to get to what that solution is. But in the short term, this is a pressing need. And as Councillor Buckley was referring to earlier in the meeting, we need patronage to go up. Fares rising doesn't actually help us with that, does it? So I think we've made our views heard loud and clear there. So if anybody else, I can't see anybody else indicating, wave at me wildly if I've missed you. But with that, then I think we've noted our concerns on that, and we'll take a watching brief on it. But we'll now move on then to item number 8, I think, which is the integrated rail plan. And certainly I've had a lot to say on this in the past, but I think Helen, from an OSPA perspective, you're going to present on this item.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So the report in the pack that you received for this committee is really just an update from what was approved at the Combined Authority meeting in December. So I really just want to draw your attention to the next steps, really, that were approved. So, and essentially what we've been focusing on is, because of the strength of feeling from the Combined Authority at the outcome of the integrated rail plan, we have been challenging this outcome. And are currently responding to the Transport Select Committee, which has been drawn upon for the IRP to gather evidence for that. The Mayor has also written to ministers seeking a meeting with ministers on the IRP and the next steps. And we are also working with government to agree governance of the studies mentioned in the IRP, namely how to take HS2 services to Leeds and to understand the most optimal solution for Leeds station capacity and its relationship with mass transit. The IRP referenced £100 million to work through some of those issues. The CA also resolved that there is a need to kind of undertake a joint piece of work to look at Leeds Sheffield rail connectivity in Leeds station, and that's us working with government on the governance of how to manage that. And then the CA also did set out that it needed to work through the next steps to look at the connectivity between Bradford and the Calder Valley, and part of the needs assessment really and relationship and how we manage the project and the work that will be going on to look at the Leeds Bradford electrification and the proposals for a 12-minute journey time on that route. So what our relationship is there. Also within the IRP and through the CA in December, we do need to therefore look at the next steps on the Trans-Pennine route upgrade, and to understand kind of how the scale of disruption and how we manage that disruption. And then finally, to develop a closer relationship with government around mass transit and the development there. And that relates to both the City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement funding and any funding that is proposed through the Integrated Rail Plan. They were the main points in that report.
Thank you. I'm not sure I want us to have a closer relationship with government around our mass transit proposals. So we're a devolved authority with a mayor, with transport powers. We should be able to sort out our own mass transit without having to go back to government all the time saying, can we do this route? Can we do that route? Is it all right to look at this bridge, that road? How much granular detail do they want to get into, to be quite honest? We know what we need to do. We're all representatives here from around the region. We can forge our own destiny. We don't need it always signed off by government. And I think, you know, the combined authority officers need to get really clear on that, that we have the powers and capabilities ourselves, and we need to forge our own destiny. And government need to trust us to get on with what we know how to do. We know our communities, and we will always act in their best interest. That's why we do this job as elected members. There are obviously lots of councillors from all parties actually have the best interests of their residents at heart, and know that better than Westminster officials. So before I go on wax lyrical, I wish to move first of all to Councillor Scullion, I think was indicating first.
Thank you, Chair. I'm amazed that wax lyrical is, you know, sort of a slight fury actually between gritted teeth or something is more perhaps appropriate. I won't go on about the political things particularly. I think it would be fitting and generous to say that we really welcome some aspects. You know, we actually welcome anything that improves transport in the north, and particularly in West Yorkshire. Particularly pleased about the electrification between Leeds and Bradford, and that's exactly the kind of thing that we wanted to see. We wanted to see more of that. So, you know, thanks are due. I think it would be remiss of me not to mention the things that the report was completely silent upon. And I think just because central government is silent on something doesn't mean that we in local and regional government should also be silent on. The first of those, of course, is electrification in the Calder Valley line. And I hope that we will be united in continuing to press for this. I was very heartened in some ways by a remark made by Andrew Haynes, looking forward to the Great British Railways in terms of the example of ScotRail, which had moved basically not necessarily in big electrification projects, but in small electrification projects, each of which, interestingly, were cheaper than the last. And one of the things I think we need to think about as a whole region is, what are the smaller asks? If we've been pushed back on the big asks, we don't give up. We look at some of the smaller asks and whether piece by piece we can achieve better rail services for people in the north. The other thing is, you know, we often talk in government terms about betterment and seeking betterment, you know, from national funds and so on. But actually, in the case of Consultative, we're looking for not making things worse. And we are extremely concerned that the electrification between Bradford and Leeds actually may mean that we don't have a direct line to Leeds, and that there will be some devil's in the detail, of course, that people will end up from Calderdale, from the Calder Valley, having to change trains at Bradford. That doesn't help anyone. And I think the last thing I wanted to say was I just wanted to put into this particular forum how very annoyed I was to see the mentions of the recent work over the holiday period at Leeds Station, which the government put out on social media and various other places, that this was part of the integrated rail plan, this recent station upgrade. No, it wasn't. And actually the problem about capacity at Leeds is a major problem that we all have to be united in putting forward in terms of making sure that the government addresses that, because it is such a problem for the whole region. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Scullion. And indeed, that work at Leeds Station, as I'm sure Councillor Hayden will come in, was planned many years ago. It's nothing to do with the IRP, and it was outrageous to see it linked in that way. I absolutely agree with you. The electrification of Leeds to Bradford, it doesn't work actually, because every train that leaves Bradford goes not just to Leeds, it goes to other parts beyond Leeds. So what happens then? Do they have to get out of that train and get into a diesel train? It's just they haven't obviously thought it through at national government level, and we in the region will help them do that thinking. But there is nothing in their plan that convinces me that we don't need Northern Powerhouse Rail, a new line going from Leeds, Bradford to Manchester. Our region and Manchester need to be much better connected. West Yorkshire needs to be connected, and we're doing that through mass transit. We'll talk about that later. But actually, we need better connectivity to the rest of the country, not just within the region. And the IRP completely misses that. And it will not be able to stand as it is. They will have to make amendments. And I just feel so deeply disappointed by the levelling up agenda that the government has purported to want to implement in the whole country. And the IRP has just shown that they have no idea about how to do that, and actually do not have the good faith to implement what they know needs doing in our region, because we've talked to them many years about it. So I'm afraid, very angry about the IRP. Councillor Buckley, did you want to come in?
Thank you, Chair. And I just wanted to go back and agree with you, Chair, with some remarks you made a few minutes ago about devolution and the mayor, the whole situation with that. If you actually take it, if you're going to have this form of devolution, if that's decided, which it has been, the pure method is simply to reduce national income tax and then give the mayor the opportunity to raise taxes in order to provide what local services are popular. So that's agreeing with you, Chair. But I just had one or two questions on this paper. And they're all sort of technical in a way as regards the wording, because on several papers now, including this one, we have reference to mass transit for West Yorkshire and Leeds. Well, can we just be clear that this is one system? Because that wording infers that you have a West Yorkshire system and then an intra-Leeds system. And my understanding is that's just not going to happen. So clarify the language, please, there. Secondly, the £100 million, which is supposedly allocated for a study, good heavens, who are they getting to do this study? Goldman Sachs. You know, what are we going to, £100 million? That, I think, needs explaining. And then secondly, on an actual technical transport matter, we have this ongoing problem with capacity at Leeds Station. And the reason it's an ongoing problem is that Leeds is the only city of a comparable type in the entire country which only has one station. And given that the city is expanding massively to the east and the southeast, and it certainly will over the next 10 years, what attention can be brought to looking at a new station to take all the people travelling into Leeds from the east, so they don't have to go right into the middle and then travel back out east? And this would be at somewhere like Marsh Lane. And I know one or two of my colleagues, and I'm looking at Councillor Campbell, he's mentioned this before. So there are my three comments, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Just for clarification, I don't think I talked about decreasing income tax and raising local taxation higher. So I do believe in fair distribution of income tax to places like the north, which I don't think we get actually of our fair share of the pie. So that's we can have an argument about that another day, Councillor Buckley. Agree absolutely about West Yorkshire. It needs to be a joined up West Yorkshire mass transit system, and I think Leeds would agree with that as well. We all want to be connected to each other. I think the language probably misled there. Around the 100 million, I think we're still waiting for government to tell us, as usual, about what this 100 million is for. Helen, did you want to come in on that? Because I think that's right.
Yeah, that's a good point to come in. We need to know what it's for, and we need to know whether we've already been awarded it or not, or, you know, is it extra money, or is it part of the what we were awarded, the SCR, I can't remember the full
CRSTS.
Yes, that's it. Well done. I can never remember it all. Just on your comments on the mass transit and not depending on government or going back to government, I completely agree. As we've seen with this IRP, we can't depend on government delivering for Leeds, West Yorkshire, and for the North in general. So we have to do this on our own. Hopefully we'll be given the full capacity in terms of finances to be able to do this, but this has to be led and delivered by us, by West Yorkshire, and it needs to be a West Yorkshire thing. And we just, as we now know, we can't depend on government. And I do feel as though a rug has been pulled from under our feet in terms of the IRP. And it's so, yeah, I really agree with that. And on the station works, I actually went to Ribblehead in the worst weather for a walk, and the train guard did actually say, have I got GPS? I wasn't on my own, thank goodness. But like, I was one of those mad people. I wasn't alone. There were other people that were as mad as me. But coming back into Leeds, there was a lot of people dressed in orange on the tracks. And it was a sight to behold, coming in from Skipton there. So yeah, just really that we've got to push this forward. We've got to work on this and on the mass transit and get it right for our people, who you quite rightly said, we know, we live here, we travel around West Yorkshire, and we know what's best, really, and so we have to lead on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hayden. Councillor Bolt.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Couple of points on this one. I think, as Councillor Scullion said, yeah, we should reflect in our considerations on what's not mentioned in the reports as well, where there is silence. And one strong silence that I feel in this is on the section 2.17, where it details rail projects, and also referring to it on Appendix 1 on page 55. Once again, there is no mention of the Penistone line. And if you look at the map on page 55, you can see the strategic link that improving the Penistone line, which has been acknowledged, I think by Mayor Brabin, but certainly by Dan Jarvis, and local MPs in putting in a levelling up bid to improve Penistone line and the link between Huddersfield and Sheffield, because the strategic link that then gives of another opportunity to pick up major rail routes and improve the connectivity north to south is something which certainly I know myself and Peter McBride have mentioned at this committee on many times. So I hope the authority will not stay silent on what the key routes that we should be looking at are, and it's not the usual suspects. The point about fair share, which you've just mentioned, Chair, as well, the Leeds station capacity is an issue, but as it says there in the report, the lack of resilience, and I think it should say at railway stations, is a significant implication, because Transpennine Route Upgrade and others are failing to deliver on the master plan, which the Combined Authority, Network Rail, Kirklees Council and the rail operators signed off on several years ago to improve Murfield Railway Station, which I think, as Councillor Scullion will confirm, is the centre of the rail universe. Network Rail have consistently said there's nothing to do with them improving the rail infrastructure, and they're trying to put that back on the Combined Authority. Well, if the Combined Authority can find money to put extra car parking in Outwood and improve the facilities there, where the patronage historically was always below what Mirfield has, then, as you said, Chair, where's the fair share of the pie? Because again, strategically, make no apology for saying that Mirfield is the only station in Kirklees and will remain the only station in Kirklees with a direct rail service to London. Even when the Huddersfield and Dewsbury connection comes on board, as far as we understand it, that's a train at 5:30 in the morning where your carriages get left on Leeds railway station in the hope that another train will come in and couple up to you at some time in the future. And nowhere in rail terms can that be seen as a direct service. So in terms of resilience, promoting economy, the authority and the mayor should be looking at what we've already got and enhancing the service, because by encouraging more people onto trains post the pandemic in Mirfield, then it's working to all our objectives. And in encouraging rail travel, Chair, again, a plea for the authority that when the authority is asked to make comment on planning applications, even though it's not a statutory authority, even though it's not a decision maker, when we get situations as we had at a planning appeal recently, where a developer is being asked to pay for a bus-only M card when they're only 400 yards away from the railway station, then we need to be looking at some joined up thinking. Let's make developers, where they're asked to be contributing on planning matters, to be encouraging future occupants for all sorts of travel. So yeah, silence and fair play. I think I agree with what other colleagues have said. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you. I found myself having to clarify what I've said quite a lot this morning. So obviously, I want to make sure I'm talking for the region needs its fair share of income distribution across the country and investment. And I don't think, if you just look at the transport investment across the country over the last 10 years, Yorkshire has fared particularly badly in our share of the national investment pot. And I think that's what I was particularly referring to. But naturally, in the region, we all try and make sure we all have a fair crack of the whip as well. That's important to us as well. So, Councillor Groves, and then we'll go to either Dave or Helen Hellerton, who might want to come in there. Kim, Councillor Groves.
Yeah, a couple of things. We haven't seen the evidence that was used for the integrated rail plan, and I think we need to keep pressing for that. And £100 million job, I'm sure any of us would apply for that one if no one's putting themselves forward. And it's really interesting that the people who've done this integrated rail plan seem to be the hide and seek champions at the moment. No one can find them to get the answers. So I think there's a couple of things on Councillor Buckley's point on another station in Leeds. We would have had an HS2 station with this new rail line. So therefore we wouldn't have needed another station. But more importantly, it's affected all our West Yorkshire rail vision and beyond, going up to the northeast nationally. It has severely hampered the people of West Yorkshire and the people in the northeast, and limited their opportunities going forward. And it's limited, as Councillor Scullion said, our opportunities for freight, because we need to get freight off the roads and onto the rail. So, by us not getting HS2, by us not getting NPR, we have been severely held back. And there's no levelling up in that agenda at all. However, we're not sitting on our hands. We've already started a strategic partnership with people in Network Rail, because even while we campaign for these bigger projects, I think there's a lot of quick wins that Councillor Scullion was referring to. And Councillor Hinchcliffe and Mayor Braben and myself have got this new strategic partnership together to see what we can deliver through the West Yorkshire Rail Vision, because we can't stand still. We've got to keep levelling platforms, putting in new spurs, and looking at how we can make the West Yorkshire Rail Vision work for us. In terms of mass transit, remember that in the CRSTS there's the 4 million that we can draw down, and we have got a connectivity strategy that we've been working on for years. And Helen may correct me if I'm wrong, but the feedback that they've had from civil servants is that they think it's a brilliant connectivity strategy with a fantastic mass transit plan in it that can serve the region. So we will be, when we've put a submission in, happy to get on and deliver that. But let's make it quite clear the 100 million that was talked about for this study and did allude to light rail, there's absolutely no way that should be incorporated in our mass transit plans, because actually that's separate money for a separate study. And it's about, the IRP was all about heavy rail. It wasn't about mass transit. So we have to really keep that clear, and we have to crack on and deliver the mass transit for the people of West Yorkshire. So I will, oh, sorry. And I'm just surprised that Councillor Ball hasn't, I think Councillor Colchett's been waving, but we just have to acknowledge that it's absolutely brilliant for our Kirklees colleagues who have been campaigning for the Transpennine route upgrade for absolutely years, and the electrification and the freight that will come across it. It's really good news. It's the most significant amount of funding that we have had in years arrive in our region. So I just think we should welcome that.
Thank you, Councillor Gross, for that. Councillor Kaushik, sorry, I didn't see you wave. Do you want to just come in on that? It's absolutely the correct point to make. Councillor Kaushik, you're on mute.
Sorry, I was on mute for a long time, and then I thought my turn is not coming. So thank you, Councillor Grove, for covering everything. Yes, as Councillor Grove said, we are like the announcement, we are delighted the announcement they are doing about TRU. In the benefit, it will be delivered to the passengers, freight, and economies. So I'm happy. I think Kirklees are going to be, will be working with WICA and Network Rail on delivering this crucial investment. So yes, and plus I'm also agree all the things you have already said, how we are disappointed, like HS2 East and NPR were not including in IRP. So yes, more or less, I think we are on the same page. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kaushik. Councillor Homewood.
Thanks, Chair. It was just briefly to say, obviously, in terms of the Transpennine upgrade, that's positive for Kirklees and Huddersfield, and that's a good thing. I think what I'm just keen on, and I think it was Councillor Scullion who was mentioned this before, around where we don't want to move backwards. And I think from a West Yorkshire perspective, we have to be come together to make sure the plans that we have work for the whole region. And what I'm concerned sometimes with some of this stuff is that we're being pitted against each other in different parts of the region. Why should we have, why should it have to be a choice between whether Huddersfield or Bradford has the right connectivity, for example? We should all be able to have the connectivity where that's needed. So I think, obviously we welcome those things, but I just think we, as obviously collective, need to hopefully come together and make the case for all the investment that's required, and not kind of get into a what they think, if I'm being cynical, what sometimes people want to happen, which is to us kind of arguing amongst ourselves about where investment should go. And
to be fair on us, actually, I think we're usually quite good at that, aren't we? In that we do support each other. I know, as leader of Bradford and chair of this committee, that for Bradford to do well, I need Leeds to do well, I need Kirklees to do well. If any one of us falls behind economically, the rest of us suffer, because we are so closely connected. So the success of all of us is really essential for each of our individual success as well. And I think it's a good point to make. I think pragmatically, as Councillor Gross said, we absolutely need to do what we can with the board that we've just set up to get improvements in the system that we've got. But I think we owe it on behalf of the people of West Yorkshire not to accept no as an answer from government, from the IRP, and we will work to change their minds and to show them that our solutions are more cost effective and more beneficial economically than the solutions they've given us, which are shortchanged for us in the IRP, and that cannot be acceptable. And I will never be able to accept that on the behalf of the people of West Yorkshire, because we have greater ambitions for our region than government do, and it's dependent on us to make sure we keep articulating those ambitions and make those ambitions a reality. So I'll just go to Helen and Dave, and if they can particularly talk about the Penistone line that Councillor Bolt mentioned as well, because I know that is something that Councillor Pandora is particularly exercised about at the moment, actually, and something that we lobbied for heavily through that Levelling Up Fund, and very disappointed it's not been successful. What are the next plans for that? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I think it's just, before I go on to that, so it's just kind of picking up on, we are still trying to receive clarity on the 100 million from government, and we have an outstanding letter to the ministers on that. Through the Strategic Rail Partnership, as Councillor Groves has outlined, we are looking at what improvements we can get through our West Yorkshire Rail Vision, and we are currently still in the process of writing our West Yorkshire Rail Strategy, which will come back to Transport Committee in due course. Within that, that's where the Penistone line will be considered from that perspective, but it is also about finding funding opportunities for it as well in following time.
Thank you very much. So does anybody else want to come in on any of that? No, are we okay? Councillor Keith?
Yeah, just to say that the view of many people in the authorities is that Wakefield were less than sort of displeased when we lost the eastern leg of HS2. It's not quite true, because we still have to consider the fact that we're going to have to get high-speed rail between Leeds and Sheffield, so it'll come down that road. I listened to a television report this week that says the government still has expressed interests in the routes, which means that people who live in houses that were going to get demolished still have that sword hanging over their heads, and so therefore won't be able to sell their houses. I think what the consensus that I've got from what people have been saying is that this government comes along and gives us these mayoral things and autonomy from central government, but it comes with strings attached. Every penny comes with a string attached, and it always comes down to the fact that when it comes to paying up, they're always Welsh on the deal. Not wishing to be nasty to the Welsh, but this is an expression, or come up short on paying. And these various schemes that they talk about, we've got to make sure that we hold their feet to the fire, the TransPennine improvements, the various different things, because otherwise they'll just continue to make these promises that they have no intentions of keeping. So that's what we need to have, is a stronger voice, and we have that stronger voice very much together.
Thank you. I think that's a good note to end on there, Councillor Keith, so thank you for that. So I think obviously we add our voice and support to the Mayor in lobbying for the region and lobbying for the investment and in transport infrastructure that we know we need so badly, not just to get us to 21st century transport, which is one of our articulated ambitions, but just to get us to 20th century transport standards, to be quite honest. That is something that I think we're all united on. So thank you everybody for your positive contributions on that agenda item. So moving on now then to the next item on the agenda, which is Leeds City Region Transport Update, and all the meetings, etc., that have been going on regarding those items. We've got a mass transit in there, of course, as well, which has been articulated at several points during this meeting. And we've got RNEP pending, haven't we? It's again expected to be published in the new year. It could be any time, couldn't it, from January to June? Is that what New Year is these days? I don't know. So Helen, do you want to take this item away? Is this you, is it?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine, thank you. So yeah, I think as you've just summed up there, Councillor Hinchcliffe, this is just summarising the latest round of discussions of the North, the Rail North, and just setting out where we are on the City Region Sustainable Transport Settlement. As you know, we were awarded an indicative settlement of 830 million as part of the spending review last year. We are due to submit a programme business case this month to government, which will set out how we intend to deliver that 830 million. Obviously, there are still ongoing conversations, as we've just been previously saying, around the relationship and the funding identified in the IRP for mass transit, and that is all interplaying through that as well. Was also just setting out in here that the connectivity strategy, the mass transit vision document will also be where the amendments to those following consultation were approved at the CA in December, and then the final versions of those will be adopted through the CA in March. And then finally, the mass transit programme strategic outline business case document is currently being considered through our assurance framework, and that will also be considered at the combined authority meeting in March. They were the main items in there. Thank you.
Thank you. Have we any questions or comments on any of these schemes? Councillor Bolt.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, we have talked about mass rapid transit several times today, and just referring to that section in the report, I know Wyker say that the 7,800 responses is one of the largest responses the authority has received. Just reflecting on comments that were made in a Kirklees scrutiny meeting yesterday when we were looking, we got some figures from consultation responses for town centre improvements. Those figures, and I think 7,800 responses is probably about 0.3% of a West Yorkshire population. The response rates in Kirklees were substantially higher than that, in the 1 and 2% range, and Councillor McBride referred to those as pathetic responses and said that we shouldn't base any judgment and projects on responses which were so low. So based on Councillor McBride's views, do we think that a West Yorkshire response of 7,800 is sufficient to start basing plans on? Also, that 80% of respondents said they supported the vision in full or in part. And yes, you can understand that. It's when the detail of MRT starts coming out, because again, referring to the Kirklees section, one of the potential routes is the former Spen Valley Greenway, which since that was decommissioned as a railway, housing has been built on both sides of it at several locations, including Hetmondwike. So I'm sure that the 80% response rate may change if somebody finds that an MRT route is going through the middle of their housing estate. On MRT, when will the planning of the technical aspects start? Because again, we know that the Spen Valley Greenway, some years ago when Mike Wood was MP, we fought against Yorkshire Water's plans, but lost because they drove a sewage pipe down the Spen Valley Greenway. Now, as far as I understand, it wasn't buried very deep. And so is it technically capable of supporting a mass rapid transit on that corridor? Or is there any agreement with Sustrans that when Yorkshire Water did that, that if it came back into a public transport realm, is there a lift and shift clause? Because before we start getting into too much detail about that, we need to understand that engineering aspects of it. But I don't know if officers want to comment on what they class as any good response rate, because I say now that we're dealing with things across a West Yorkshire perspective with something like about 2.5 million residents, is 0.3% acceptable? Because that certainly from one of our cabinet members, it wasn't yesterday. Thank you.
I think you're comparing apples with giraffes was something I heard yesterday, which I thought was quite a good analogy, because actually it's two very different things. So here you're consulting on something which hasn't yet got the full detail behind it. And I think you answered your own question, Councillor Bolt, in that actually once you start consulting on detail, we haven't got the detailed routes, we don't know where the routes are going to be suggested for, what options are available. Once you start getting to that level of consultation, I think you'll see a far higher level of responses to consultations. And I'm guessing, and I don't know the consultation you're referring to in Kirklees, but I'm guessing the routes and the specifics of that were much more detailed than we're at the stage at here. So it is comparing two very different schemes, I would suggest, at this moment in time. Councillor Groves, do you want to come in? Yeah,
obviously, Leeds councillors who have been involved in NGT in the past. So, consultation is key as things develop. But Martin, I think you need to be careful when you're saying MRT, because you were talking about engineering and technical work there. mass rapid transit can be a bus or it can be a tram. So there's been no decision on what mode would be used where. And that's, you know, the outline, strategic outline business case and routes and technology has all to be decided. The work has been done meticulously to get us to this stage. I think there's been more work done on this than we've ever done in West Yorkshire for a mass transit system, because we do not want to end up at another public inquiry. People of West Yorkshire, if you went out and said, you can have a mass transit system tomorrow, you can have X, Y, and Z down every road to towns and cities. The feedback we get from them is, we want it. Why have we never got it? So we're making sure that all the detailed work is done before we go anywhere.
Thank you. I mean, Helen, perhaps a more opposite question to answer would be, when is the next consultation on this? Because this is the first of many consultations, isn't it, on this project?
Yes, it is. So in terms of mass transit, we're currently looking at the programme and we're just reviewing it, and in relation to funding confirmations and all the rest of it. But at some point later this year is what we're aiming for. Okay,
so there'll be more chances for people to reply to more detailed proposals in the future, when I'm sure the response rate will go up. Any more questions or comments on this paper? It just, obviously, as I say, we've gone through a few things before on here. People are waving at me. I can't, do put something in the chat or put your electronic hand up, and then I see that a lot easier. Thank you. I'm not seeing anything. So with that case, we note the progress, and in some cases still waiting for information from government again in that paper. And we move on to the next, and indeed I think final item, which is a summary of transport schemes, which actually already have gone through and been presented and approved at the Combined Authority meeting of 22nd of October. Those should have been fully looked at already. But Councillor Buckley?
Yes, very briefly, Chair. I just wanted a word of reassurance, if I could seek that. Reference is made to the White Rose station on page 77, which fine. But I just wanted reassurance that Thorpe Park station and Park and Ride is still on track, and that there aren't any delays envisaged there, please.
I think Councillor Groves probably is maybe wanting to reply on that. Councillor Groves?
Councillor Buckley, yes, it is still on track. And also, I believe, obviously, through TIU, there may be forward tracking east of Leeds, which makes it more important. I think the further conversations are to be had, because, as you know, White Rose has private sector contribution. And actually, that's probably what all schemes need going forward, a private sector contribution. So I think that's a conversation that needs to take place with both Thorpe Park and with Leeds Bradford Airport, the level of contribution.
Thank you very much. Any more questions or comments on that paper? No. Oh, Councillor Groves, did you want to speak again? Is that a new hand, or is that a delayed hand?
No, it's come.
Okay, fine. Well, in that case, I think we just note that report. And when is the next meeting of this committee? Look at Dominic. Where's Dominic gone on me patch of squares here?
Sorry, Chair, I couldn't find the button to unmute myself. The next one's on the 4th of March.
Okay, lovely. Well, I will see everybody therefore on the 4th of March. Thank you very much for your attendance, and keep pushing the region, keep lobbying for the investment we need. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you, Chair. Well done.